Hey, hello, I'm Kråkan, also known as Scarecrow, and welcome to Closet Movie Rambles, where I talk about old movies that I found in my closet while cleaning. This week's movie is Priest, the unrated version. It's an action movie from 2011. It's about 1 hour and 23 minutes long, based on the Ming Vu graphic novel starring Paul Bettany, Carl Urban and Kam Gigandet. So this movie is basically about vampires and priests, and they fighting each other in a dystopian kind of world. And the movie starts at a place called Soramira Hive, which is basically like a big constructive, looks like an anthill, and that's the way that the vampires hide from the sun in these kind of big hive-like construction. So there's a group of priests that enter this hive in order to eradicate or stop these kind of vampires. So they get into the hive, and of course it's a trap, and Carl Urban's character gets dragged down, and he kind of disappears, and that's the start of the movie. And then there is an animated intro that explains this war between humans and vampires, and how it kind of destroyed the world, and how the people fled into the cities behind walls, and where they were protected by church. And basically they created these ultimate weapons called the priests, which they basically kind of locked up these vampires in their hives and in kind of camps, so they couldn't hurt anyone. And then basically they got disbanded because they were kind of dangerous or something like that. And then we cut to a family outside in the outskirts, because basically the whole world, because they've depleted their resources, is a barren wasteland, and there is this family living out there trying to just survive, trying to make things grow, I guess, try to do some farming. So the main character, there are three characters. So Owen, the father, as it seems, and Shannon, the mother, and the teenage daughter Lucy, and they're arguing over dinner, just basic survival. And then the house that they're in or the shack, start to shake, and they hide Lucy under the floor under this trapdoor, and Shannon gets killed, and Owen gets badly injured, and the vampires basically finds Lucy. And they cut to the main character, which is not defined by name. He's just called Priest, and he is basically in this town, dystopian town. The cloud is a very set move. I think it's raining, and it's very dark, and all this kind of smog and kind of exhaust pipes kind of blackens the sky, so it's always dark there, and all very depressing. And there is messages on speakers saying, if you go against the church, you go against God, and it's like this basic propaganda kind of thing. It's kind of funny. You can draw parallels to religion and other kind of political, things, I guess. And he basically goes into a confession to tell, basically, forgive me, Father, for I've sinned, kind of thing. But it's kind of a twist on it, so it's like this future holographic recorded thing that's of a priest, kind of listen to a priest, I guess. And he talks about his dreams about the war, and then he has flashbacks to the war, which he was in, the war between vampires and the priest, I guess. And then after he doesn't get calmed down or anything by this kind of talking about the problems. He just goes home, and there's a man waiting for him. It's a sheriff named Higgs, and he basically informs them about the vampire threat, and that they're back and they're out there somewhere. And Hicks, which is the sheriff guy, tells him that you are basically the best one, so I came to you. And the priest, he goes to his council to confront them about the vampire threat. But the council kind of they don't really believe him, because they have these sort of camps where they lock up the vampire, and it's very secure, and they kind of, there is no vampire threat. The war is over, you're delusional, just go home. And it's kind of this situation. They're kind of like war heroes in a sense, but the war is over, so they're not needed. They're respected, but they're not needed in society. They kind of don't fit in. They're kind of like outcasts. And then we cut to the character of Lucy. She's on a train in a cage, and she is introduced to Carl Urban's character. He's a former priest that basically turned into a hybrid between a vampire and a priest, so he can be in sunlight and everything. But the character is called the Hat, or the Black Hat, basically, because he has this cowboy kind of hat on, and he's always got a smirk on his face, and kind of one of those cool badass characters. And he basically explains to Lucy that he is no longer a priest, but he's something more powerful. And then it cut back to the priest and him talking to an old friend in a bar about the whole situation. And his old friend said, I was worried about you leaving. And he gets surrounded by guards. And the priest kind of show off his talent, because he's good at fighting. He's very fast, and he kind of beats them down. And he goes out and gears up. And he takes a sort of futuristic bike, and he just goes out outside of the city to look for clues, basically. So he arrived at an outpost 10, and he started looking through for clues and everything, and the character of Higgs is there. And so he basically follows Higgs to the town, which I think he's the sheriff of that town, sheriff. And they come across this character, which is kind of funny. It's he's played by Brad Dourif, and he's also in this Lord of the Rings movies. Plays Grima Wormtongue, if you have any reference to that. And this character is a charlatan. He's basically selling holy water. He says, "Protect you from the vampires," and all this is like fake water blessings. And Hicks is the authority of the town, the sheriff, so he takes up a gun and just basically shoots the bottle and breaks it. And he says, "I have one reason. I need more reason." And he points the gun to the charlatan's car and starts firing. There's two reasons. One bullet or more. And he says, "Okay, all right, I'll leave." Jesus, and he leaves. "Don't blame me when you're dead," or something like that. And the priest character checks up on Owen from the earlier scene, the one who got badly injured. And on his deathbed, Owen basically tells the priest that, "Promise me this, that you will bring home Lucy safe when you will kill them all." And so the priest preps Higgs's bullets, because Higgs uses a gun. The priest put little crosses on the top of them, so they supposedly do damage to vampires. And Higgs is he proves himself to the priest that he is worthy of following him by basically cleaving a bullet in half in midair with a knife. And this is one of those kind of ridiculous moments that it's sort of like the effects. It's a bit like The Matrix, but with a lower budget. So it's kind of like almost cringe-worthy kind of effects. But it's one of those movies. It has good parts and it has bad parts. But anyway, they leave at dawn, and the priests accept him. And cutting back to the council in the town or the city, they summon the other priests to find the other priest, the renegade, and they bring him back, dead or alive. It doesn't really matter, just bring him back. And it cuts to the priest and Higgs again. They're charging their bikes. So Higgs reveals to the priest that he loves Lucy, and that's the reason why he's going after her. And they're going to this place, which it's a reservoir, kind of a place where they keep vampires. Reservoir 98, I think it was. And they arrive there, but they notice something is wrong because there are no guards and everything is calm. There's just these familiars there. And familiars is kind of human slaves to vampires. You feed them some blood and they become loyal to you. So they follow these tracks to this place. And they enter and they talk a little bit to the familiars and all that. And they enter the hatch looking for Lucy or some kind of trace. And then the familiars turn on them and they attack them. And the priest and the Higgs defend themselves, and they put one of them down, and the priest interrogates him. But the familiar is stalling, and the sun goes down, and basically that wakes up the real vampires, because when the sun is down, they get up. And this is one of the more ridiculous scenes again. The priest takes up a Bible or a book, and he reads a passage from it, and he basically throws up these cross-shaped throwing stars, and they're in the air. He plucks them one by one and he throws them at these vampires, putting them down one after one. And he continues killing almost every one of them. And he continues to interrogate this familiar about the location of where they were taking Lucy and all that. And they say they were going to the east. And then he gets killed by another of the elderly vampires, I guess, and the vampire runs off. And then we cut to the other priest tracking down Higgs and priest, I guess I can call him priest. And they learn that to the east of this Reservoir 98 is Solamira, the place where it all began. The movie all began. So they go there, and the priest tells Higgs just watch out and keep guard at the entrance. And the priest goes down there by himself, and he finds one of the other priests, a priestess that was looking for him, and he kind of holds her up against the wall, and she agrees to help him because they more or less share the same nightmares from the war, and they were actually part of the same group that ventured to Solamira in the first place, where they lost the other character that became Black Hat. So she agrees that they will find Lucy and put an end to this craziness. And meanwhile, while this is going on, they find tunnels underneath the hive. But before they can do anything, there's a gunshot. And they rush up to Higgs. And there is this big, bulky vampire. And I give the film credit for this, because vampires are basically just in movies they're portrayed kind of different. Like some movies portray them like romantic kind of things, or others just like this beast, human-like. But the vampires in these movies are basically more beasts, and they don't have eyes, but they just have these long fangs. I think that's kind of cool. But the main character, they run across this huge vamp that Higgs was trying to shoot, and it's basically a hive guardian. It's a big bulky vampire that can't get through the small tunnels. And then there is a fight with this hive guardian, and another ridiculous scene. The big bulky guardian is trying to attack, and the priest kind of focuses his energy, and he starts running against the beast. And the priestess throws rocks in front of him in the air, and he kind of steps on them, gets up to the height, and he just slices the beast in half or something. It's like kind of stupid, but it's kind of an action movie. So. And then they follow the tunnels, and Higgs follows. They go through the tunnel, and they see that it leads up to another shaft, kind of big open place. And they find out that the vampires has been planning this for a long time, and they're breeding an army. And so they follow this shaft up, they climb up, and they arrive at this the town of Jericho. Cutting to Jericho at night. The train man is sitting in his booth and it starts to shake. And an unscheduled train arrives and he goes out to check out what's going on, and he gets killed. And Black Hat steps out and the vampire onslaught begins, because this train is full of vampires, and the vampires attack and kill everyone in the town of Jericho. And then you cut to daytime when the priest and the priestess and Higgs are there. They arrive and they see that the priests are dead and put on crosses for display. And then you cut to Lucy getting offered food by Black Hat, and he monologues about how he's more or less the perfect being, and the benefits of, and how he basically became a vampire, that the vampire queen offered her blood and made him into something special. And while he's monologuing, she grabs a knife. And the priest, cutting to the priest and the priestess, and they're basically burning the bodies. And the priestess offers the priest a cross. It's basically like a combat cross. It's a weapon from the war that they used, and she kept it. And then they ride to intercept the train, but before they ever enter the trains, Higgs is threatening the priest with his gun and says, "What will you do when you find Lucy? Would you kill her if she turns?" And it's revealed by, I think it's the priest, that she says, like, basically Lucy is the priest's daughter. And I think I didn't explain is that the priests or priestess, they are not allowed to have children. They're basically, when they take this oath and when they become these supernatural beings, basically they are not allowed to have children. But before he actually turned into a priest and got these awesome abilities, I guess he had a child in the child of Lucy, I guess. And then they ride down together. They come kind of agreed, and they ride down together to confront the train. So Higgs enters through the back, and the priestess rides ahead with bombs. So basically, if everything goes south, because they realize that this train is going directly to the citadel, the main city, where there is, it never gets dark because there's smoke. So the vampires, there will be a war when the vampires will arrive there, and it will be very bad. So if everything goes really bad, she's supposed to blow up the train tracks. And the priest enters the top roof when he gets confronted by Black Hat. And then the priestess rides in front of the train, and she gets chased by other bikes, familiars on bikes, and she basically puts down the bombs. But one of the familiar basically breaks the not the fuse, but the detonation device. So she have to improvise with that. And the priest is in a fight with Black Hat, and he gets thrown around and he falls under the carriage of the train. He basically survives and crawls under the train. And Higgs' adventure is going south because he comes across these cocoon-like vampire sacks, which he disturbs, and he gets hunted through the train. Then he comes into a room, and the priest basically breaks through the floor, entering the carriage. And and then from the rooftop, Black Hat drops in, and he kicks Higgs out through the moving train, and he basically continues to fight the priest. And In this scene, Lucy is being held by a familiar, and she uses lantern oil to light him on fire, so she is supposed to let him go. And she tries to attack Black Cat with a knife from the dining table that she kept, and he basically just disarms her easily, and he basically tells her that this priest is your father, and then he nails him to the floor or the wall with the knife, and leaves him there, and the whole room is burning, and he takes Lucy and he basically tries to escape. He jumps up through the roof of the train car, and meanwhile this is happening, Higgs is basically he's getting a familiar bike to try to catch up. That's what's happening, and the priestess deals with the last of these familiar vampires, and she straps on all the bombs to her bike and rides directly to the train for it to collide. And on the top of the roof of the train, Black Cat is trying to basically suck Lucy's blood, but he gets interrupted, and the priest gets loose from his burning prison, and he gets up and he throws this combat cross, which is basically a knife, into the throat of Black Cat, and basically Lucy falls over the edge, and the priest grabs her hand, and there's this all kind of action moving, and Black Cat comes up, Black Cat comes up and step on his fingers, trying to make him lose his grip, and the priestess is driving right at that moment right into the train, and they kind of let go, and she jumps off the bike, and Black Cat more or less gets disintegrated by the flames of the explosion. So the priest gets up from the rebel, and of course they're all okay, and Higgs gets his Lucy and the priestess, and they kind of part up. But there's one more thing he has to do. So the priest returns to the citadel with evidence. He goes into the council room, and he basically has a sack, and he enters the room, and he gets called a traitor or a betrayer, and he basically throws the vampire head across the floor, and he says there's plenty more where that came from. There's a whole train outside of the city, and he gets called a liar. And again, instead of getting apprehended, he goes out to just deal with the problem himself. At this point he's badly injured, but he's such a badass, he just walks out of there, and he's gonna do this by himself, basically. Can I recommend this movie to anyone? Yeah, I mean, as an action movie, sure, just as a pure action movie. And I bet even like the graphical novels is better than this, because there's something about even the reference to the Matrix, and the storyboarding of the Matrix was made like a comic book style. You take the best sides of a character and you work on that. So I think that The Priest is probably a better comic book or a graphic novel than actual movie, because you can get away with more epic stuff and more cool stuff in a comic, because it's more believable. When you try to translate that into a film, it's not that good, and you need to have good directors, you need to have good special effects, and I don't think that this film really cuts it. But no, I mean, I can recommend the graphic novel then, and not the actual film. But yeah, I hope you like this, and have a good one. Take care.